Welcome to Nightique. I'm Edward St. Pé. Well, tonight we're going to take another look at the terrible event that Katrina was. We're in the 10th year, the 10th anniversary of the hurricane, and we've got with us a great guest and a friend, Mr. Jim Pollard, who is with AMR Ambulance.
Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you. Now, AMR Ambulance Services operates in a number of counties across Mississippi, including the Jackson area, but you also operate on the Gulf Coast, and you were the operational force ambulance-wise when Katrina hit, right, Jim?
That's correct. In Harrison and Hancock counties, AMR and our predecessor company, Mobile Medic down there, has been the sole provider of emergency and non-emergency ambulance service since, gosh, the mid-'70s. And we love our work, and we are local folks, and when the big storms threaten, our colleagues on the coast ask some of us AMR folks in other parts of the state, such as here in Jackson, to come down and help out with the big storms. More specifically, for Katrina, some of us, such as me, were asked to come and work in the so-called emergency operations centers, used to be called civil defense, the function of city and county government that helps deal with massive catastrophes. And in the instance of Katrina, there were several of us who were asked, as in previous storms, to help staff some of the desks that are in each emergency operations center. And those folks are that's literally the control center for disaster shelters, transportation services, not just ambulance service, public information, which is where I was asked to work, and a host of other services and events that all have to be coordinated to give the community the best chance of making it through the disaster with the least damage.
Had you ever gotten a call, come to the coast before the hurricane hits before?
Oh yeah, I've been with AMR not quite 21 years, and initially worked, my first place of employment with AMR was on the coast, and it was based in the headquarters in Gulfport, and worked there from 94 to 98. So there weren't really big storms in that period, but there were a number of tropical storms. And then when I came up to Jackson in 98, I was called back from time to time. And so happened that, 2005, we were hit not just with Katrina, but within a matter of days thereafter, Rita, back to back.
Okay, so did you have any idea of what you were about to witness with Katrina as you were traveling down there before the storm hit?
That's a really good question. We were looking at, of course, for many days, the weather images and the reports about the size of the storm and the wind speed and the expected storm surge. It's not really the wind that kills people, it's the storm surge, the water that gets pushed up on land. I think those folks who stayed behind, a great many of them have been quoted as saying, "Oh well, we weathered Camille, and that was the worst ever. So we're going to stay in place, and we'll make it. And if we made it, this house made it through Camille, it can make it through anything." I don't think there were a lot of people who really anticipated just how horrible it was going to be, and there was a mystery until the thing hits and gets on through and has done its worst. Then you got to do the assessment.
So, I remember as a person on the air doing weather, we were watching Katrina, and it looked like it was going to hit New Orleans, and then it veered off at the last minute toward the Gulf Coast.
Yes.
And so New Orleans says, well, we're spared. It's not going to hit us, but in truth, the backside of that storm hit New Orleans, and of course the levees broke and the flooding, and we all know what happened in New Orleans.
Right.
But the main impact, the eye passed over the Biloxi Gulfport area, somewhere in this vicinity, right?
Well, as best I've ever been educated, the eye of the hurricane went straight up the Jordan River. Jordan, pronounced Jordan. And that's really to the west side of Hancock County, which is the westernmost county in our state. And Hancock County was absolutely devastated. The word devastated barely is enough to describe it, Edward. And Harrison County, a large part of it had a huge hit as well, but the further east that you went in Harrison County, the less the damage was. Still awful, don't get me wrong, even on over into Jackson County. But let me put it this way. I had the opportunity the Thursday after the storm. The storm came in on a Monday, blew through on a Monday. And I had the opportunity on Thursday to take a helicopter flyover and jumped on that bird. And we started off over in the east, Ocean Springs area, and headed back over to the west. And the further you went west, it was obvious that it was just getting worse and worse and worse, the devastation. There were more and more homes and businesses, nothing was left but the slab. And the best description I've been able to come up with is looking down from the chopper. It's as though God took a whole bunch of those boxes of fireplace matches, the long fireplace matches, and just strewed them, because that's what the 2x4s and so on looked like. I will say, and I think folks would agree with me, thank goodness for that railroad that parallels the Gulf itself. It served as a berm. It was a few feet high. So you could see where an enormous amount of the debris stopped at the berm of the railroad track. So the damage was, and of course the storm surge, which got as high as 30-something feet, I've been told, over in Hancock County. You know, the water, not as much of the water went over the berm. So right on the other side of the railroad track, the damage was clearly not as horrible as it was south.
Well, we'd like to talk to you about some of the particular situations that you encountered while you were there. And I know you saw a lot, and would you say unforgettable things?
On my deathbed, gosh, it was as close to, pardon my language, H-E-L-L on earth as I ever want to get. And you know, I grew up near the coast in North Carolina and went through some pretty nasty storms there in my youth, childhood. This far surpassed anything I'd ever seen. It was just astonishing, the power of nature. I'd like to take a moment or two to recognize some folks who were rather behind-the-scenes heroes, in my view. For example, we lost power in the Emergency Operations Center, which was in the Harrison County Courthouse, about a third of a mile from the beach. And we weathered the storm pretty well for the first several hours, and the lights would go out, the power would go off, and then they'd come back on for a while and then go back off. And we were running on an emergency generator. And as the storm hit its peak, the generator went out altogether, and we were essentially without contact with anyone, quite frankly. And we knew that in any storm there are these rain bands, you know, these wind bands, and that sometimes you'll have a little lull. And there we were, just dead, pardon the expression, dead in the water. We couldn't really help anybody to speak of while we were completely out of power. And there was a lull in the storm, and that's kind of a relative term because the winds and the rains were still just horrible. And three fellas, there's a large military presence, you know, on the coast. There were three fellas from the Seabees, I believe, who I happened to walk out with them down this hallway, a northwest facing door of the courthouse. And these guys had put on what I call moon suits. I mean, it was like head to toe protection, you know, with face masks and so on. And they linked themselves together with cable, and they went out in this storm. Edward, they got that generator back online for us, so we were able to do our jobs helping folks again. And I just thought that was one of the bravest things I'd ever seen in my life. It so happened I was stupid enough to kind of peek out the door that they exited and just kind of watched them leaning into the wind. I mean, it was like watching somebody on top of, you know, mountain climbing, leaning into the wind. And about that moment, something caught my eye up here, and I don't know whether it was part of a roof or part of a billboard, but this huge piece of something just, I don't know, must have been a couple hundred feet in the air, just went helicoptering, just rotating over me like this. And I went, whoa, I think I go back to my little safe desk now. And those guys, in my view, were real heroes. They were among the unsung heroes, in my view. I didn't get their names. I wish I had.
There's so many remarkable stories about folks on the coast through the storm. And, well, you were a hero. You were there. Oh. You were right in the middle of it.
I definitely
working in emergency, yeah. So consider yourself a hero.
Well, that's kind of you.
Our governor, Haley Barbour, was there.
Yes.
He was working through it all. When you look back at the whole storm and the fallout from it, Louisiana didn't fare too well from the standpoint of how they handled a lot of the issues, whether it be local government or state government. But whereas you look at Mississippi, and we seemed to come out of it fairly well,
yes.
From the standpoint of how our leaders interjected yes. themselves into it,
Yes, well, we had Mr. Latham was the head of Mississippi Emergency Management, and I have enormous respect for him, head of MEMA, did a wonderful job coordinating vast resources in order to help the coast survive the storm itself, and then begin the recovery quickly. And of course, the maestro overall was Governor Barbour. He was there at the Harrison County EOC within like a couple of days of the storm passing through, and or less, and was really so encouraging to us. He inspired us to keep doing our best for the community, coordinating all the various services like food services and search and rescue and on and on. So knowing that we had that quality of leadership was at the uppermost level of state government was an enormous encouragement. And I tip my hat to all those folks on the state level. They were terrific to work with. I can tell you that in my experience, here's the way I've heard the difference between Louisiana's experience with Katrina compared to Mississippi's. Louisiana had a flood. The dikes broke, okay, the levees broke. Louisiana had a flood. New Orleans, at least. Mississippi had a tsunami. And that storm surge again in some places was as much as 30 feet plus.
Well, you could see some of the casinos were lifted up and moved
yeah.
a block or two down the road. It was really amazing.
I don't know what the tonnage is on those barges, but it's got to be enormous. And I'm just thinking, holy cow, what does it take to float one of those things, let alone break it in half?
And over 200 people died
yeah.
in the coastal area
yeah.
in Mississippi.
Yeah.
It's a lot of deaths.
Yeah, it was. And we had some extraordinarily brave folks in search and rescue teams immediately on the ground after the storm had cleared through and areas were proclaimed to be safe to enter. We had enormous support from military, as I mentioned earlier, law enforcement, firefighters, on and on and on. The business community began digging out immediately afterwards as well, as best we could. And the health community, the healthcare community was attempting to put the pieces back together as well. The hospital in Hancock County was pretty much rendered inoperable for a very long time. Huge resources came in from all over the country for healthcare and every other part of trying to maintain some semblance of civilization on the coast to get everything back in working order as you would expect a modern community to at least get through the initial worst few days. There were mobile hospitals sent down, for example, from Carolina's Medical Center in Charlotte. Was an incredible resource. It was a complete hospital under these extremely well built fabric tents. So we owe so much to the rest of the country. You might not remember that Mexico, the nation of Mexico, actually sent some Mexican Marines to help on the Mississippi coast. I mean, after all, we'd help them with earthquakes and so on a number of times. But literally, I think it was the first time in U.S. history that a foreign nation had sent some of their best and most capable folks to help the United States. And I'm not sure how long they were there, but I distinctly remember that they did indeed land some folks to come and help. There were some other folks I view as heroes. Remember, I was in the Harrison County EOC in Gulfport for the first part of the storm and during the storm. The Hancock County EOC immediately to the east of us, that Emergency Operations Center was also really close to the coastline, just really practically a stone's throw. And as I said, Hancock County got the worst hit of all. They were on the first floor of the building, and the water kept rising and the water kept rising. They had to shut down the Emergency Operations Center because the water was seeping into the first floor altogether. It was getting higher and higher. So these folks, about 30 of them, went up to the second floor, and the water kept rising. So they began to fear for their very lives, quite literally, and they took a piece of paper, they wrote down a number about 1 through 30, one number for each person down the left column of the paper, and then they wrote each person's name alongside one number, and last step was they put that person's number, they wrote it in indelible ink like a Sharpie on each person's forearm, put that piece of paper in a baggie, sealed it, and tacked it to the roof, tacked it to the ceiling. And over in the Harrison County EOC, we took some calls from folks in the Hancock County EOC, Edward, leaving farewell messages for their families. That was one of the most gut-wrenching things I've ever heard. Now, I didn't ever hear any of those messages myself, let me be clear, but I knew they were taped, and some of my colleagues from AMR and other folks who were working in the EOC, you could see that it was just because we knew those people. They were our brothers and sisters in arms, if you will, and it was just terrifying. And I can't imagine how desperate those folks were. Thankfully, the water stopped rising, and no one died in the Hancock County EOC, but close enough.
I know you have a number of interesting anecdotes and stories, and we're going to talk to you about some of those, some of the things you saw during those terrible days of Katrina when we come back. So we'll be right back after these messages. Your on-air career journey begins at broadcastdemo.tv. Both recent graduates as well as seasoned news and weather veterans need an updated and fresh demo tape to apply for those on-air positions across the country. At broadcastdemo.tv, a one-day visit to our WeatherVision studio, and you'll have an HD and digitally edited demo tape that you'll be proud of. Broadcastdemo.tv. Invest in yourself. Ingalls Shipbuilding is hiring electricians, structural welders, machinists, ship fitters, pipe fitters, and pipe welders in our Pascagoula, Mississippi site. Signing bonuses available for pipe welders only. Positions are union represented. Come build your career with Ingalls Shipbuilding. Go to www.huntingtoningalls.com/careers or call 888-935-1507. So Jim, you were with, as you still are, AMR Ambulance, so you were called down to the coast prior to the onshore onslaught of Katrina. So you were there when it hit. What was going through your mind as that storm was coming inland and you were in the building there on the coast?
Well, the building's pretty well fortified, and of course we had we were sending our prayers heavenward that it would withstand everything, and it did. The Emergency Operations Center has additional fortifications. It's a part of the courthouse as a whole, but it has additional fortification. And the courthouse caught there was about an inch of rain flooding rather, that built up in the lobby of the Harrison County courthouse. At one point, must have been the height of the storm. I stood up on a table and looked out some windows that were fairly high near the ceiling, and it was just, the storm was just demonic. I looked across the street, and there was a stop sign that was bent back on its pole, metal pole, and the stop sign, the sign itself was fluttering. The only way I can describe it is like a butterfly's wings, like this, back and forth. And every tree on that side of the street was like, okay, everybody lean north. And it was like, oh my God, this is the worst of the worst. So I went back to my little safe desk again. But it was just flat out intimidating.
Did you fear, at any point, did you fear for your life? Did you think that?
No, I personally did not. Maybe I was too stupid to fear for my life. But we didn't hear any part of the building collapsing, none of the roof being ripped off and so on. We didn't see an enormous amount of water coming into the lobby, which would then have made its way back to the operations center itself. So I don't recollect being afraid for my life.
Did you, at any point, well, I guess you were getting word that they were literally going to be thousands of deaths between New Orleans and the Gulf Coast?
Yeah, I think one of the saddest moments, I think everybody just kind of went, oh, whoa, gee. When we heard that the levees had broken in New Orleans, it was like, oh, wow. Because we could just imagine, that given the fact, as you said at the beginning of the show, folks really didn't expect New Orleans to get that big a hit, and it did.
It was the levees breaking. Exactly. I mean, that was the whole crux of the issue. I mean, it was not the storm itself, it was the levees breaking.
Right, exactly. And, it was just... It was the kind of thing where you go, wow, this is going to be the biggest catastrophe in the nation's history. That whole city, that whole city is below sea level. And one of the first things that went through my mind was, well, okay, there goes a quarter.
Well, okay, here's an example of the quarter. Now, you would think the quarter would go first.
It's a little higher.
But it's a little higher.
Right.
High enough where it did not flood.
Right.
And it's as we know, it survived. But other areas, the Ninth Ward, and then some areas uptown, a lot of areas nearby were devastated.
Exactly. And my heart still goes out to all those folks. I mean, you go to New Orleans to this day, and it still doesn't seem to have the population that it did before the storm. No. The streets just aren't, there's not as much foot traffic in my view. And I've been back several times, but I think it's coming back. But there'll be so many folks who wound up in Houston or Atlanta.
Right.
They'll never call New Orleans home again. They've made another life.
Right. Well, businesses that were destroyed, there was nothing to go back to.
Exactly.
So they just didn't rebuild.
Well, there's still quite a few homes and businesses that have not really been touched much at all. I think it was on Mississippi Public Broadcasting, I saw a documentary during the observance of the 10th anniversary that showed quite a few houses that were still boarded up. And we still have, perhaps a little of that in Mississippi, but I don't think anywhere on the scale that we find in New Orleans.
Well, Charity Hospital had flooding, and a lot of the folks that were incapacitated there died as they were trying to move them out. And that happened in Louisiana, but you had a personal situation too, where a relative ended up dying as a result of the storm.
Yes, my wife and I view the death of her father, my father-in-law, we view him as a Katrina victim. He and his wife lived in Bogalusa, which took an enormous strike. And somehow, with all the electricity off and so on, he was a bedbound Parkinson's patient. She somehow got him in the family car, got him to Natchez, and then we arranged for him to be transported up here to our home. We couldn't really take care of him here. He had deteriorated a good bit because of all of that stress. My mother-in-law admitted him to a nursing home. He died 3 days later.
So, as a result of what he went through, you can attribute that to impacting
right,
his
because he was pretty stable prior to having to go through all of that stress, and I just think it was more than he could withstand.
Well, Jim, I want to thank you for coming on the show and talking about your experience from being right in the middle of Katrina when it hit with AMR Ambulance. And AMR Ambulance is a service that we all know, and we thank you guys for all the great work you do
thank you.
around the state.
Our work's a calling, Edward. Thank you very much.
And I know that those memories of Katrina will be with you for the rest of your life. I know I was not at ground zero for Katrina, but I will remember it always for how it came right up the gut through central Mississippi and tore central Mississippi to pieces too.
Yeah, it was still a Cat 1. It was still a Category 1 when it came through this area, and our folks were really busy here taking care of evacuees, tens of thousands of evacuees, like say over at the Coliseum, and then folks who fell off roofs and so on after the storm went through. But it was an honor to serve on the coast and also here in central Mississippi.
Well, thank you, and please come back soon.
Thank you.
That's Mr. Jim Pollard from AMR Ambulance, and thank you for viewing our show tonight, and we'll see you next time on Nightique.
Bengal presents From One Legend to Another.
Good day. I must say I've deduced that Bengal roach spray is a superior product. It's kept all traces of those vile creatures from my home, which lets me focus on more meaningful pursuits.
People trust Bengal Roach Spray's legendary performance. No odor, no mess, no roaches. Bengal Roach Spray really works.
With Bengal, I love having a little more me time.
When you are looking to further your education, there's only one university that towers above the rest, Jackson State University. Jackson State University is one of the leading universities in research, technology, and innovation, graduating more than 1,300 students annually and a consistent growth in revenue. Jackson State University is ranked #1 amongst the HBCUs in research and development. Make the right choice, the one choice, one Jackson State University, changing lives one student at a time.